The IRS letter arrived on a Thursday morning in April, in a stack of mail I picked up from the box before leaving for school. I teach high school history. I have a first period class at 7:45. On Thursdays I also have a department meeting after school, which means I don't get home until nearly 6. I set the mail on the kitchen counter in the morning without looking at it, and looked at it in the evening when I came home. The envelope was from the Internal Revenue Service. It was addressed to Rachel and David Keller, joint filers. The top of the letter said, Notice of Audit, Examination of Tax Return. I read it twice. The notice said the IRS had selected our joint return from 2 years prior for examination. It listed a series of items under review. The items were mostly in the business expense category. It gave a date for an initial interview, 3 weeks from the letter's date. David was in Tucson that week for work. He traveled frequently for his consulting business. I had learned not to expect him home on any specific schedule. I called Tom Park, our accountant. Tom, we got an IRS audit notice today. For the return from 2 years ago. What category? Business deductions, mostly. Consulting fees, business development, marketing. Can you take a photo of the notice and send it to me? I sent it. He called back in 12 minutes. Rachel, I need to pull the return and go through it. Can you give me about an hour? I said yes. I made dinner. I graded 2 assignments. I waited. He called back 43 minutes later. Rachel. His voice was different from the first call. Careful in a way it hadn't been. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Of course. Are you aware of a business entity associated with your and David's filing called Keller Morse Wellness Ventures, LLC? I put down the red pen I was holding. No. You've never heard that name. No. Tom. What is that? A pause. I didn't prepare that entity's documentation. I didn't file the deductions associated with it. I need to review everything before I can tell you more, but Rachel, I think you should bring an attorney when we meet. I think you should call someone tonight. Welcome to Quiet Karma Stories. My name is Rachel Keller. I am a high school history teacher in Phoenix, Arizona. I have been married to David Keller for 9 years. We file joint taxes. I signed our joint return every year in the specific trusting way of a person who believes that a shared financial life is actually shared. I called Sandra Obi that night. David and I met in our late 20s at a conference in Scottsdale. He was a financial consultant, independent, self-employed, building a client base. I was 3 years into teaching and had started to understand that the work was permanent, and the salary was what it was, and I was at peace with both. We married after 2 years. We bought a house in Phoenix. We filed jointly from the first year, which David had said made sense given his self-employment and the ability to offset some of his business expenses against our combined income. I had agreed because I trusted him, and because tax strategy was his area and history was mine. What I knew about our finances. We had a joint checking account where my salary was deposited and from which our mortgage, utilities, and household expenses were paid. We had a joint savings account. David had a separate business account for his consulting income and expenses, which he managed independently. He showed me our tax returns every year before we signed them. He explained the deductions in general terms. I signed. What I understood about the business deductions. David had consulting clients. Consulting required travel, meetings, sometimes marketing materials. The deductions made sense in the broad way that things make sense when you trust the person explaining them. What I did not know. The deductions had not been making sense for 3 years. Tom Park, who had been preparing our returns for 6 years, had not prepared the deductions for the most recent 3 returns. Someone had added items to the returns after Tom's preparation, but before filing. David had access to the electronic filing system. David had signed the returns on behalf of both of us. A practice we had established years earlier when my school schedule made the filing window difficult. I had trusted him with my signature. He had used it. There is a specific kind of knowledge that arrives all at once when a pattern becomes visible. The retroactive clarity of seeing 9 years of trust as 9 years of exposure. I felt it sitting at the kitchen table on a Thursday night in April, holding a phone and waiting for Sandra Obi to answer. She answered on the 3rd ring. Sandra Obi. My name is Rachel Keller. Tom Park is my accountant. He told me to call you tonight. He said he found something in our tax return that I didn't know about, and that I need an attorney before the IRS meeting. A pause. What kind of something? An LLC I've never heard of with my name on it. And my husband's. And someone else's. What's the LLC name? Keller Morse Wellness Ventures. Who is Morse? I don't know, I said. I have no idea. We met in Tom's office on a Saturday morning, Tom, Sandra, and me. David was still in Tucson. I had not told him about the audit notice. Sandra had advised me not to. Tom had spent 2 days pulling everything he could access. The returns he had prepared, the returns as filed, the business entity registrations associated with our social security numbers, and the credit reports connected to our joint filing. He laid it out on the conference table in 4 separate folders. Rachel, I want to walk you through this in order, because the order matters for understanding what happened. He opened the first folder. This is the return I prepared 2 years ago. These are the deductions I submitted. Standard business travel for David's consulting, home office allocation, professional subscriptions. Total business deductions, $41,000. That's what I signed. That is what you signed, yes. This, he opened the second folder, is the return as filed with the IRS. Same return number, same filing date. Business deductions, $117,000. I looked at the 2 numbers. Someone added $76,000 in deductions after you prepared it. After I prepared it, and before it was filed. The additions are categorized as consulting fees, business development, client entertainment, and marketing. None of those categories appear on the return I prepared at those amounts. Sandra made a note. The filing access. David filed electronically. He had the login credentials. I sent him the prepared return as a PDF. He uploaded it to the filing system. Tom paused. I don't know exactly how the modification occurred. That's for the IRS to determine. What I know is the return I prepared is materially different from the return that was filed. I looked at the folder. The LLC, Sandra said. Tom opened the third folder. Arizona Corporation Commission Records. Keller Morse Wellness Ventures, LLC, filed 18 months ago. Members: David Allen Keller and Rachel Marie Keller, and Tanya Lee Morse. Rachel Marie Keller is you, Tom said. You are listed as a silent partner. I have never signed anything for an LLC. Tom placed a document on the table, the operating agreement for Keller Morse Wellness Ventures. It had 3 signatures at the bottom. One was David's. One was Tanya Morse's. One was mine. I looked at the signature with my name under it. That is not my signature, I said. Tom nodded slowly. I didn't think it was. Sandra was already writing. Tom, the credit report. He opened the 4th folder. 2 accounts I had never seen. A business loan for $180,000, co-signed by Rachel Keller and David Keller, connected to the LLC. A business credit card with a $47,000 balance, opened in Rachel Keller's name. I have never applied for either of those, I said. I know, Tom said. He closed the folder. Rachel, I'm sorry. I should have caught this sooner. I should have. Tom. A pause. You're helping me now. That's what matters. Sandra clicked her pen. We have 3 weeks before the IRS interview. Let's talk about innocent spouse relief. Sandra Obi's office was on Camelback Road, and she had the particular focus of an attorney who practices at the intersection of tax law and family law. A combination that exists because the two are more connected than most people understand, until they need someone who understands both. She explained innocent spouse relief the way a person explains something they have used successfully many times. When a joint return contains errors or fraudulent items that one spouse did not know about and did not benefit from, the IRS has a provision that can relieve the innocent spouse of liability for those items. It requires documentation. It requires a clear showing that you didn't know and had no reason to know. It also requires that holding you liable would be inequitable given the circumstances. I signed the return. You signed a return. The return that was filed is different from what you signed, based on Tom's documentation. Your signature authorized the document Tom prepared. It did not authorize the document that was filed. That distinction is important, and we will make it clearly. What about the LLC and the loans? The LLC filing uses what appears to be a forged signature. The loan applications, we need to see those documents, but if your signature was used without your knowledge or consent, you are a victim of fraud, not a co-borrower with liability. The two situations are legally distinct. What does the audit interview look like? You sit with the IRS agent. You answer honestly. You bring documentation of what you knew, what you signed, and what was done without your knowledge. You do not minimize. You do not protect David. You tell the truth in the order it happened. A pause. Rachel, I want to be direct with you. The audit is going to be uncomfortable. The agent will ask questions that feel personal. You will be describing, in detail, the financial architecture of your marriage in a way that reveals what your husband was doing. The best thing you can do in that room is be completely accurate. What happens to David? That depends on what the audit finds. Potential outcomes range from civil penalties and back taxes to criminal referral for tax fraud. If the loan signatures are forged, there's a separate criminal exposure related to that. The IRS does not decide his fate. They refer to the Department of Justice if the evidence warrants criminal prosecution. I looked at my hands on the table. I've been his co-signer for 9 years, I said. On everything. He had access to everything with my name on it. I know, Sandra said. And we're going to document every single thing he did with that access. Starting Thursday. The IRS interview was in a federal building on Washington Street. A conference room with a table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out onto a parking structure. Agent Patricia Wynn was a woman in her 40s with reading glasses and a yellow legal pad, and the specific professional composure of someone whose job is to find what is true in a financial record, regardless of what the people in front of her want to be true. She had a file on the table. It was thicker than I expected. She began with the return itself. She walked through each deduction category. For each one, she asked, "Were you aware of this deduction? Did you approve this deduction? Do you have any documentation of your involvement in the activity this deduction describes? For the consulting fees, no, no, no. For the business development expenses, no, no, no. For the marketing and client entertainment, no, no, no." She made a note after each answer. She did not react. She moved to the next item. Then she opened a second section of the file. She placed the Keller Morse Wellness Ventures LLC documents on the table. The operating agreement. The business registration. The EIN application. Ms. Keller, are you familiar with this entity? No. I was not aware it existed until Tom Park found it during his review. She pointed to the signature line with my name. Is this your signature? No. She made a note. She placed a second document on the table. The loan application for $180,000. Are you familiar with this loan? No. I discovered it exists through the credit report Tom Park pulled. Is this your signature on the co-borrower line? I looked at it. The same wrongness I had seen on the LLC documents. Close but not mine. No. She placed the credit card application. This account. No. I did not open this account. She placed one final document on the table. I had not seen this one in Tom's folders. It was a bank statement for a business account associated with Keller Morse Wellness Ventures. The account had 2 authorized users, David Allen Keller and Tanya Lee Morse. My name was not on the account. Ms. Keller. Agent Wynn set down her pen for the first time. I want to explain where this audit is going. The entity Keller Morse Wellness Ventures was used to generate deductions on your joint return. The loans and credit line associated with the entity are in your name. The operating account for the entity has 2 authorized users, your husband and a Ms. Tanya Morse. Your name does not appear on the operating account, which means you had no access to funds generated by the entity that was filed under your name. She picked up her pen. In my experience, that is a specific kind of arrangement. I want to make sure I understand it correctly. Agent Wynn's investigation, combined with Sandra's discovery process in the divorce filing, reconstructed the LLC's history over the following 8 weeks. Keller Morse Wellness Ventures, LLC had been established 18 months ago in Arizona. Its stated purpose was wellness consulting and retail operations. Its business address was a commercial space in Scottsdale. The commercial space in Scottsdale was a wellness boutique called Tanya's Studio, a retail and services operation offering curated wellness products, yoga classes, and private health coaching. It had opened 14 months ago. Its grand opening had been covered briefly in a local Scottsdale lifestyle blog. The boutique's startup costs had been funded as follows: $60,000 from the $180,000 business loan in Rachel Keller's name. The remaining $120,000 had been deposited into a separate account in David Keller's name that the audit had not initially flagged. $31,000 from the business credit card opened in Rachel Keller's name. Boutique inventory, display fixtures, renovation of the Scottsdale retail space, a commercial espresso machine, and 12 months of rental deposits. $16,000 in LLC operating expenses categorized as business development on the joint tax return. Expenses that, when itemized by Agent Wynn's examination, corresponded to the boutique's first year of marketing costs, social media management, and a website build. Tanya's Studio had opened 14 months ago. David had been with Tanya for at least 3 years. Sandra's investigator determined through phone records and financial tracing. The boutique had been a 2-year plan. David had spent a year building the financial infrastructure, the LLC, the loans, the credit line, the tax deductions, before the doors opened. He had used Rachel's name as the financial foundation because Rachel's credit was good, Rachel's income was stable, and Rachel's signature was something David had 9 years of practice accessing. Sandra presented this timeline to me in her office on a Tuesday afternoon. He planned it, I said. The sequence of filings suggests advanced planning, yes. I looked at the timeline she had laid out on the conference table. The boutique opened 14 months ago. Correct. He was building this for a year before that. At minimum. I thought about the year before the boutique opened, the increased travel, the new consulting client he had mentioned, vaguely without detail, in Scottsdale, the evenings he was on calls after dinner, the Saturday he said he had a client meeting and came home after 9. I had not asked detailed questions because I had trusted him. He had used my trust the same way he had used my credit. I am going to tell you what David had been doing, in the order that the audit and Sandra's investigation reconstructed it, because understanding the sequence explains why it took 3 years to surface. Year 1 of the scheme. David established the relationship with Tanya Morse. He began discussing the boutique concept. He began identifying the financial infrastructure he would need. He reviewed Rachel's credit report, which he had access to through their joint accounts, and noted that her score was strong. He began the process of opening the business loan in Rachel's name, using documentation he prepared and a signature he had practiced. The loan approval took 6 weeks. $60,000 was transferred to an account associated with the LLC. The remaining $120,000 went into a personal account in David's name alone, which the audit later determined had been partially used for personal expenses related to the Scottsdale property, and partially held in reserve. Year 2, the boutique opened. The business credit card, in Rachel's name, was the operating card for the boutique's retail purchasing. David filed the first modified tax return, adding the Keller Morse deductions to the return Tom Park had prepared. He filed it himself electronically, using credentials Rachel believed were for standard filing purposes. Year 3, the boutique was operating. Tanya's name was on the business account. Rachel's name was on the debt. The deductions continued. The credit card balance grew. David filed the second modified return. The audit flagged the third return because the deduction pattern had become anomalous relative to the reported income. A flag that the IRS system generates automatically when the ratio crosses a threshold. Agent Wynn was assigned. David did not know about the audit notice until I told him, 3 days after our meeting with Tom. I called him in Tucson. We got an IRS audit notice. A pause. For which year? 2 years ago. Business deductions. Another pause. Longer. I'll look into it. Sandra Obi is my attorney. She'll be at the interview. The longest pause. Rachel. David. Sandra Obi is my attorney. Any communication from you or your attorney should go through her." I ended the call. He drove back from Tucson the next morning. He came to the house. I did not open the door. Sandra's investigator visited Tanya's studio in Scottsdale on a Wednesday afternoon, as part of the discovery process for the divorce filing. The boutique was on a small retail corridor in North Scottsdale, clean, well-designed, the kind of space that signals careful curation. The window displayed wellness products arranged with the specific intentionality of a store whose owner cares about presentation. There was a small sign in the door, "Tanya's Studio, Wellness for Your Whole Life." The investigator photographed the exterior. He noted the commercial lease sign in the window, which listed the tenant as Keller Morse Wellness Ventures, LLC. Inside, Tanya Morse was behind the counter. The investigator did not speak to her. He documented what was visible from the entrance. The renovation quality of the interior, the retail displays, the event schedule posted near the door listing upcoming yoga classes, and a wellness workshop. He brought the photographs to Sandra's office. Sandra showed them to me at our next meeting. I looked at the photographs for a long time. The boutique was exactly the kind of space I might have walked into, in another version of my life. Well-lit, thoughtfully designed, the kind of place that feels considered. Someone had put care into it. Someone had spent money on it. My money. My name. My credit score that I had built over 9 years of a teacher's salary deposited carefully and bills paid on time. The total documented contribution from accounts in your name to this business, Sandra said, is $216,000. When you combine the loan funds directed to the LLC, the credit card charges, and the tax deductions that reduced your household tax liability and effectively subsidized the boutique's operating costs. $216,000. She knew, I said. Sandra was careful. Her knowledge of the source of the funds is a question the investigation will address. What we know is that her name is on the operating account. She had access to the LLC documentation. She signed the operating agreement. She signed an operating agreement that listed me as silent partner. Yes. She knew there was a third member of the LLC. She knew, Sandra said. What she knew about the circumstances, whether David represented the funding as legitimate, is what the investigation will determine. I looked at the photograph of the boutique window, the wellness sign, the curated display. It's a nice store, I said. She built something. She did, Sandra said. With your money. I filed for divorce on a Thursday in June, 2 months after the audit notice. Sandra filed simultaneously. The divorce petition, the innocent spouse relief application with the IRS, a civil fraud complaint related to the forged signatures on the LLC and loan documents, and a motion for asset preservation pending the divorce proceedings. The asset preservation motion was granted the same day. It froze the business accounts, the LLC, and David's personal accounts pending the divorce settlement. The boutique's operating account, in David's and Tanya's names, was not directly frozen, but the LLC's associated assets were placed under court supervision. David's attorney contacted Sandra within 24 hours of the filings. His attorney communicated 2 things. David was prepared to negotiate, and David was represented in the IRS matter by a separate tax attorney. Sandra communicated one thing back. Rachel was not negotiating informally. Everything would go through the formal process. The IRS matter moved on its own timeline. Agent Wynn's investigation had expanded beyond the initial audit into a formal examination of potential tax fraud. The case had been referred to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Sandra received notice of the referral on a Tuesday morning and called me immediately. Criminal investigation referral. That means the IRS believes the evidence supports potential criminal charges. They are investigating. They have not charged anyone. The process takes time. What are they looking at? Filing a false tax return. Using fraudulent deductions. Identity theft for tax purposes. Using your identity to file returns you didn't authorize. The forged signatures on the loan documents are a separate federal matter that the FBI Financial Crimes Unit may become involved in. IRS and FBI. The 2 agencies communicate in fraud cases. Yes. I was quiet for a moment. He thought I would sign the return and never look at it.